Chapter 1. Embers of Ambition. The forge fires of Za Nagarun belched black smoke into the rust-red sky, blotting out the sun like a curtain of soot. Beneath the watchful gazes of bull-faced idols and obsidian ziggurats, Chaos Dwarfs toiled ceaselessly, their skin scorched from years beside molten metal, their lungs wheezing with the toll of brimstone and ash. It was here, in a subterranean hall illuminated by magma rivers and rune-forged braziers, that Thrice-Coiled Ironbraid first revealed his ambition. He stood on a dais of skull-carved basalt, his beard bound in rings of gold and barbed iron, each inscribed with the symbols of Hashut. His left arm was no longer flesh, but a mechanized gauntlet of black steel and demonic brass, steaming with internal heat and twitching unnaturally when idle. Before him stood a circle of high-ranking sorcerer engineers, daemon-smiths, and slave-lords. Their expressions were unreadable beneath bronze masks, but murmurs echoed like hisses from deep cracks in the earth. Thrice-Coiled raised a scroll wrapped in serpent hide and unfurled it with a snap. "The temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars," he growled, his voice like grinding stone. "Deep in the heart of Lustria, beneath it sleeps the scepter of Tepok, a relic of slan origin, said to manipulate the very ley-lines of magic that pulse through the earth. If we claim it, we claim mastery over geomantic energy," finished Varan Blackblight, his molten eyes whitening behind his helm. "Such power would make us as gods," Thrice-Coiled said, "no longer second to those soft-skulled sorcerers of the north, no longer just the anvil, we shall be the hammer." The hall erupted into thunderous approval. Horns blared, chains rattled, 1,000 slaves moaned in their pens, sensing something wicked had just taken shape. Preparations began immediately. Workshops hammered out towering war engines, tracked siege beasts bound with demonic spirits, artillery trains bristled with magma cannons and death shriekers. Slaves by the thousands, greenskins, ogres, even some broken men from the Empire were shackled and marched to the loading holds of the massive ironclad dreadnought, Ashwake. She loomed in the harbor of the River Ruin, her hull covered in sacrificial glyphs and warp steel plating that shimmered faintly with malevolent life. Among the slaves was a hobgoblin named Gritsnag, cunning-eyed and whip-scarred, who watched the loading with wary amusement. He knew Lustria by name, whispers of a jungle that devoured whole armies, of golden temples guarded by cold-blooded gods. Still he said nothing. Even a sly dog knows not to bark at thunder. The voyage took weeks. Through churning tempests and jagged reefs, the Ashwake pressed forward, steam-powered wheels cleaving the seas like knives. On the 17th day, they crossed into uncharted waters. Strange birds wheeled overhead, and the sky turned sickly green. By dawn of the 21st day, Lustria rose on the horizon, an emerald leviathan, steaming with humidity, riddled with buzzing insect clouds and towering trees that reached like skeletal fingers toward the heavens. The shoreline was festooned with algae-covered ruins and monolithic statues of serpents, frogs, and other bestial forms. The jungle behind them pulsed with life. Thrice-Coiled stood at the prow, cloak whipping in the wind, eyes aflame with unnatural fire. "Landfall," he bellowed. "Awaken the golems, prepare the scouts." The Chaos Dwarves disembarked with brutal efficiency. Earthshaker mortars were wheeled onto land. Massive, demon-bound constructs marched ashore, their cyclopean eyes glowing a malevolent crimson. Slaves hacked at the jungle with cleavers, machetes, and jagged saws, sweating blood under lash and heat. By evening, the first signs of resistance were found. A scouting party, 3 Dawizar and 10 hobgoblins, vanished without a trace. In their place, Thrice-Coiled found only flayed skins nailed to tree trunks, bones gnawed and stacked into spirals. Strange glyphs carved in blood and bile adorned the forest floor. The air thrummed with malice. "What beast did this?" spat Daemon-smith Ralgar. Thrice-Coiled knelt beside the symbols, and traced them with his gauntlet. The metal hissed where it touched the blood. Not a beast. A message. That night, the jungle attacked. It began with chittering noises, barely audible over the campfires. Then shadows moved, faster than the eye could follow. One hobgoblin shrieked as a dart struck his neck, convulsing before vomiting blood and collapsing in a heap. Screams erupted all around as more were hit, tiny projectiles from the darkness, tipped with curare, necrotic venom, and worse. Then came the silence. Then the eyes. Dozens of them, yellow and unblinking, reflected in the firelight from the underbrush. The first, Saurus warrior, emerged like a specter of primeval wrath, its scales mottled in camouflaged hues, a wicked stone blade in one hand, a crescent-shaped shield in the other. It roared, and the camp exploded in chaos. Slaves scattered. Chaos Dwarves braced and fought back, axes clanging, flamethrowers belching gouts of green fire. But the jungle warriors were swift and merciless. A daemon smith had his head bitten clean off by a charging Kroxager, the stump geysering blood onto the fetid ground. Eshkul stood in the heart of the carnage, laughing as his mechanical arm tore a skink in half and crushed another beneath its piston-powered claw. "Let the jungle howl," he bellowed. "We are the fire that never dies." By dawn, the attackers had vanished. The jungle returned to stillness. Of the 200 who made landfall, 36 lay dead, torn apart, or poisoned. Another 40 had vanished. Rashkul stood atop a mound of charred corpses, gazing into the trees. He whispered a single word. Interesting. Chapter 2. Into the Green Hell. The jungle was not merely a place, it was a living, breathing malignancy. Its roots pulsed with ancient power, its foliage exhaled steam thick with spores and the fetid stench of decay. Even the sunlight was a stranger here, reduced to thin, jaundiced shafts that pierced the canopy like hesitant knives. Every step forward through the emerald labyrinth brought the Chaos Dwarf expedition closer to madness. The scouts marched first, hobgoblins and enslaved men armed with jagged cleavers and rust-pocked blades, their eyes constantly darting into the underbrush. Behind them came the engineers and soldiers, hauling their lumbering constructs of demon-forged steel through terrain that fought them with every root, vine, and mire. The trees moaned in the wind, insects the size of skulls buzzed through the air, and more than one slave collapsed, foaming at the mouth from a single bite. By midday, the corpses began to mount. A skaven slave tripped over a root and fell, face-length, into a bed of spiny red fungi. Within seconds, the mushrooms pulsed and detonated, releasing a cloud of spores that turned his flesh to bubbling sludge. His agonized screech barely had time to echo before he was a puddle of steaming pulp, his fur dissolving like fat in a furnace. The Chaos Dwarfs didn't stop. They couldn't. Thrice-Coiled Ironbraid led them from the front, his metal gauntlet sizzling against the wet jungle as it hacked apart vines and creepers with brute force. He had replaced his outer robe with a war cuirass, etched in demonic runes and glowing faintly where the ambient magic of Lustria was thickest. On his shoulder perched a brass-bound spy construct, an automaton shaped like a raven, its eyes glowing red, its wings twitching like a half-maddened bat. "Keep moving," he snarled. "The temple lies due east, beneath the Serpent's Maw Ridge. We are within a day's march." That day stretched into agony. Thorns the length of daggers tore through boots and flesh. Leechworms burrowed into ankles and wrists. One ogre slave began screaming and clawing at his face until his own eyes hung from his cheeks, wriggling as something within them tried to escape. He was put down with a bolt to the skull. The jungle began to close behind them. Vines that had been hacked away by machetes regrew in moments. Trees shifted position, subtly, but enough to confuse direction. Daemon-smith Curzar, tasked with geomantic readings, began to sweat and stammer, insisting the land itself was moving, breathing, resisting. Then the drums started. Low and rhythmic, they echoed through the trees with a primal resonance. The beat was not just sound, it was a pulse that rattled the bones and stirred ancient fear. Thrice-Coiled halted the column, raising his hand. Silence fell. The underbrush rustled. A spear shot from the trees, whistling through the air. It pierced a dwarf's neck, the obsidian tip shattering his spine. He fell, gurgling, blood pulsing in thick spurts onto the moss-covered earth. An ambush. Skinks in war paint exploded from the foliage, hissing and shrieking. They moved like ghosts, darting through the ferns with blowpipes and javelins, slashing and vanishing in the blink of an eye. Their eyes gleamed with purpose, holy rage tempered by ancient discipline. A chameleon skink leapt from a branch, landing on a hobgoblin's back. Its obsidian blade flashed once, twice, severing the spine and opening the jugular. The hobgoblin died, gargling, his last breath a cloud of blood mist. Thrice-Coiled roared, raising his daemon-forged war staff. "On the phalanx, burn them back." The Chaos Dwarfs rallied, forming ironclad lines, shields locked, axes gleaming. Flamethrower teams unleashed gouts of green alchemical fire into the trees. The jungle screamed, flora caught alight, the skinks retreating with chittering fury. One caught mid-flight was engulfed in flames, his body twisting as he burned, bones audibly snapping from the heat. The battle raged for minutes that felt like lifetimes. And then silence again. The skinks were gone. Only corpses remained, 12 Chaos Dwarves, 25 slaves, and dozens of skinks. The smell of scorched flesh hung like a shroud. Thrice-Coiled walked among the bodies, his boots squelching in blood and slime. He reached down and pulled the helm from a dead Saurus, one of the few that had fought in the open. The creature's face was locked in a snarl of defiance, its jaw shattered, but its eyes still burning with purpose. He handed the skull to his raven construct, which clamped it in its brass talons. "Deliver this to the temple's sentries," he said. "Let them know we're coming." The automaton took flight, wings slicing the thick air. That night they made camp in a hollow between two moss-draped ridges. Spiked barricades were raised, ward runes were carved into the earth. Yet no one slept. Eyes darted at every whisper, every rustle. Some swore the trees whispered to each other, in a language too old for sanity. As the night deepened, the jungle pulsed again, not with drums, not with sound, but with breath. A living thing, watching, waiting, hungering. Chapter 3. The Temple of Thrice-Coiled Stars. At dawn, the mist hung like ghost skin over the jungle, thick and cloying, draping the underbrush in cold dampness and muting every sound. Only the rhythmic clanking of iron-shod boots and the low growl of grinding gears broke the silence. The Chaos Dwarf expedition, reduced in number but hardened by blood, pressed on. It was midday when they saw it, half swallowed by creeping vines and hunched beneath the jungle canopy like some great slumbering god. The temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars rose in tiers of black stone, each level inscribed with spiraling glyphs that shimmered subtly in the filtered light. The structure exuded an oppressive stillness, as if time itself bent around it. Moss flowed down its steps like green ichor, and the giant serpent idols that guarded the stairways seemed to watch them with disdainful jeweled eyes. Thrice-Coiled Ironbraid's breath hissed through the vents of his mask. "There it is," he growled, "the heart of the storm." They approached cautiously, flamethrowers lit and blades drawn. Skinks had left no visible guards, no traps, no signs of patrol. It was too quiet. Even the birds had vanished from the trees. The first to step onto the temple steps was a hobgoblin scout named Creeks. He'd survived 3 ambushes and boasted of gutting a Saros bare-handed. He laughed as he climbed the ancient stone, lifting his crude axe. The temple reacted. A sickly hum pulsed from the glyphs. Creaks froze mid-step. His body twitched violently, spasming as unseen forces rippled through his flesh. His skin bubbled like tar in a furnace, stretching, splitting, eyes popping in wet bursts. He fell backward in pieces, bones unspooled from muscle, organs liquefied, face a smear of agony. The air went still again. Daemonsmith Kurza knelt beside the remains, his gauntlet glowing as he traced the glyphs. "Ward glyphs of the old ones," he murmured, "still active, defensive, reactive." "Disarm them," Dracul ordered. The ritual took hours. Incantations in the dark tongue were whispered, while sacrificial blades slid across slave throats. Blood poured into carved channels on the stone. Daemons bound to brass spheres were released, screaming, their essence absorbed by the runes. Finally, the glyphs dimmed. The hum ceased. The Chaos Dwarfs advanced. The first level of the temple was a killing ground. The moss-concealed pressure plates and pivoting panels. One hobgoblin stepped too far, spears burst from the floor and ceiling in a blink, skewering him like meat on a spit. Another activated a collapsing wall. The stone slammed into him with such force his body exploded in a mist of blood and bone chips. Beyond the traps, they reached a chamber ringed with concentric circles of obsidian. At its center was a pit that descended into pure darkness. Lizardmen reliefs covered the walls, depictions of serpents coiling through stars, slan seated upon floating thrones, and skinks bearing staves of burning stone. "They used this place to harness something," Ralgar murmured. "Ley-lines? Aether currents?" "It's not knowledge I seek," Drashkul replied, stepping into the circle. "It's dominion." He raised his staff. With a hiss, the floor pulsed. The pit opened wider, revealing a spiraling stair of smooth, ancient jade. Faint blue light pulsed from below. They descended into the heart of the temple, deeper than any natural cavern, past walls slick with condensation and vines with barbed tips. The air grew colder. Magic thickened until it became almost solid, brushing across skin like cobwebs. At the lowest level they found it. The scepter of Tipok rested upon a stone plinth, surrounded by a circle of silver runes. It was no ordinary artifact. The staff floated above its pedestal, rotating slowly, encased in a crystal of pure magical energy. Its shaft was carved from meteorite, etched with glyphs that bent the eye. At its tip, a sphere pulsed like a captive star. Even the daemonsmiths recoiled. The artifact sang, a high-pitched keening at the edge of perception that vibrated in the skull. Dracul stepped forward alone. "Bring me the binding chains." A hobgoblin approached, cradling an iron box covered in snarling demonic faces. As he neared the circle, his eyes rolled back and he dropped to his knees, screaming. His body twisted unnaturally, bones snapping from within. He clawed at his own throat until blood gushed from between his fingers. With a final, ragged gasp, he collapsed, steam rising from every orifice. Drashkul didn't flinch. He raised his mechanical arm and plunged it into the circle. Pain erupted through his entire body. Veins bulged, skin cracking like old porcelain. His beard ignited. His eyes bled. But his gauntlet, forged from the bones of a daemon prince, held. Inch by inch, he forced it through the magical barrier. With a roar of triumph and agony, he seized the scepter of Tepok and ripped it from the plinth. The circle exploded. A shockwave flattened everyone in the chamber. The walls trembled, cracks split the floor. Magical backlash surged through the air. 3 daemon smiths were incinerated where they stood, reduced to piles of scorched metal and blackened bones. Above them the temple trembled. Roots cracked. Vines shrieked. Statues bled black ichor. Something ancient had been disturbed. Thrice-Coiled stood in the center, laughing as the scepter pulsed in his hand, its energy coursing through his flesh and into his soul. But high above, deep in the emerald canopy, reptilian eyes blinked. The jungle had felt it. And it would answer. Chapter 4. Awakening the Slumbering Guardians. Lustria screamed, not with voices, but with the groaning of trees, the grinding of ancient stone, and the wailing winds that surged through the canopy. The air thickened into a heavy broth of ozone and blood. Across the verdant expanse, animals scattered, serpents slithered underground, and even the insects fell silent. Something had shifted in the unseen architecture of the jungle, the geomantic web that bound the land to the will of the Old Ones. Far from the desecrated temple, hidden beneath a mountain of scale-covered stone and vines, a slumbering force stirred. Deep within a sacred spawning chamber buried in the ruins of Tlanhuepec, the magical sensors of a skink star priest flared to life. His lidless eyes, pale as moonstone, snapped open. He hissed a command in the old tongue, and the chamber walls glowed with runic light. Constellations flared across the vaulted ceiling, shifting in unnatural patterns. The stars had changed. The jungle's lifeblood had been pierced. The slain Mage-Priest Zotal Khan, ancient beyond reckoning, hovered silently in his sanctum, his corpulent body preserved in a state of meditative death sleep. At the Star Priest's signal, the chamber's glyphs turned to blazing gold. The light poured over the mummified slan's form. Zotal Khan's eyes opened, and the heavens trembled. Back at the temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars, the Chaos Dwarfs were celebrating. Torches blazed. The camp rang with brutal laughter and the crack of whips. Skulls, some still wet with brain matter, had been stacked into cairns, and crude banners bearing the sigil of Hashut waved proudly. Slaves were forced to dig trenches around the temple, while others fed coal into the bellies of war engines. At the heart of it all stood Thrice-Coiled Ironbraid, his beard scorched black, one eye weeping glowing ichor, and the scepter of Tepok clutched in his gauntlet. The artifact pulsed with steady, unnatural rhythm. Its energy coursed through him, warping his voice, twisting his flesh subtly with each passing hour. His veins glowed faintly. His teeth had become fangs. He did not sleep. He did not blink. He saw the lines now, glowing filaments beneath the earth, threads of power older than gods. "We will not return to Zar Nagran empty-handed," he declared. "We will return as kings of fire and sorcery." But the jungle had not forgotten. That night, the first warning came. It began with silence, an utter, consuming stillness. No wind, no chirps, no rustle of leaves, just breath and the distant hiss of steam. The firelight flickered uneasily, casting long, twitching shadows. Then, the drums began. Not drums made by mortal hands, but the jungle's own rhythm, thudding pulses like the beating of a god's heart. Hobgoblin sentries began vanishing. One moment they stood, squinting into the dark. The next, there was only a blood trail and a single twitching hand still gripping a spear. The Chaos Dwarfs formed ranks, eyes scanning the trees. Their war machines hissed and growled, loaded and primed. Then the trees exploded. Saurus warriors charged through the underbrush like scaled juggernauts, their bodies painted in blood and sacred oil. Their mauls and stone swords flashed in the torchlight. One slammed into a Chaos Dwarf line, sending limbs flying with a single sweep. An axe caught it in the chest. It roared, pulled the dwarf close, and bit through his throat like brittle wood. Chaos Dwarfs retaliated. Flamethrowers engulfed the trees in emerald fire. Screams echoed as the forest lit up. Magma cannons spat death, tearing a Kroxigor in half and showering nearby warriors with molten gore. From the darkness came razor-dawns, their backs bristling with spines. They screeched and launched volleys of barbed quills that punched through armor like paper. A demon-smith's head vanished in a fountain of red mist, his helmet spiraling into the night. Drashkul stood atop a dais of skulls, the scepter raised high. He howled in the tongue of demons and unleashed a bolt of raw magical force. It streaked across the battlefield, slamming into a charging carnosaur, flaying half its face to bone. The beast roared and thrashed but kept charging. Its rider, a Scar veteran, leaned low with a jagged lance of sunstone. The charge hit the flank of the Chaos Dwarf lines like a meteor. The carnosaur tore through steel and flesh, its jaws snapping shut around a full rank of warriors. One was bitten in half at the waist, intestines hanging like ropes. Another was flung into the air, landing with a crunch and skidding into the roots of the temple. Blood painted the stones red. The Chaos Dwarfs began to falter. Drashkul screamed for the Ironbound, his demon-possessed war golems. The constructs strode forward with pounding steps, each bearing weapons fused with cursed souls. One drove a spiked fist through a Kroxigor's chest, pulling free a ribcage that pulsed and twitched. Another impaled 3 skinks on a single blade, roaring with the laughter of a bound demon. Still, the Lizardmen came. They moved like a tide of ancient wrath, guided by the stars, unrelenting. Even when torn apart, they fought. Even when burning, they bit and clawed and screamed their hatred for the defilers. And then, horns sounded. From the jungle emerged Temple Guard, their armor gleaming, their halberds drenched in sacred venom. They formed a wedge around a massive skink priest, bearing a palanquin of bone and gold. On it sat the floating form of Slen Jotulkan. His eyes locked onto Drashkul. His thoughts pierced the fabric of the world, pressing into every skull like a branding iron. "You have broken the stars," he whispered into every mind. "Now you shall be unmade." The scepter in Drashkul's hand flared, its power suddenly resisting him, the artifact shaking violently as if trying to escape. The jungle howled, and the real war began. Chapter 5. Jungle Stalkers. The rain came down in sheets the color of rotting jade, warm and greasy as blood. It hissed as it struck the war machines, steam rising from the superheated metal like the breath of dying gods. The temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars loomed behind the Chaos Dwarfs, its ancient stones now blackened and fractured, and the once mighty siege camp was reduced to a mire of churned earth, broken barricades, and the scattered remains of the dead. No horns sounded, no banners were raised. The jungle had changed its tactics. Logic. Now it stopped. The Chaos Dwarves moved in tight formations, their eyes darting constantly, fingers twitching on triggers and hafts. Hobgoblin outriders, once cocky and cruel, now muttered prayers to hush shut under their breath, fingering charms of bone and iron. Their ranks had thinned to shadows. Fear had settled in, not as panic, but as the grim certainty that the forest wanted them gone. The jungle attacked not with armies, but with precision. It began with the cook fires. One moment, a hobgoblin was stirring a pot of gruel. The next, his head dropped into it, cleanly severed. His body remained standing a moment longer, as if confused, before collapsing and gushing blood into the flames. His killer, never seen. The next night, a group of engineers found their machine saboteur scarred, gears twisted, cables severed, and the demon heart that powered the construct shrieking as it tore itself apart in a frenzy, crushing 2 handlers before imploding in a burst of red flame and screeching madness. No tracks, no witnesses, only the jungle watching. Then came the symbols, painted in blood, scratched into trees, spirals, stars, and forked tongues in patterns that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was looking. A Chaos Dwarf interpreter tried to decode one of the messages etched into the stone. He stared too long. By the time they found him, he had gouged out his eyes and carved matching symbols into his chest, deep enough that his ribs showed through the gory script. He was still alive, muttering the same phrase in an alien tongue, "We walk where you sleep. You dream in our shadow." It only grew worse. Skink chameleon assassins, painted in swamp tones and smeared with poison, crawled along the tree lines and ruins. They waited, patient, silent, then struck. One slipped into a tent and drove a blade through the mouth of a demon smith while he slept. The blade exited through the base of the skull, clean and precise. Another ambushed a pair of hobgoblins, relieving themselves at the jungle's edge, slitting their throats before vanishing into the undergrowth like vapor. When a sentry line was found sleeping, they were not simply killed. Their heads were removed, stacked in a perfect pyramid, and left on the steps of the command tent. Their eyes had been replaced with jungle beetles, antennae twitching in unison. Paranoia spiraled into rage. Drashkul ordered flame sweeps, teams of Chaos Dwarfs armed with gouts of green fire, torching anything that moved. Trees howled as they ignited, vines curled like dying serpents. Jungle creatures, some never seen by mortal eyes, died screeching. The scent of burning sap and charred flesh hung thick in the air. But for every patch burned, another seemed to grow. It was alive, it remembered. The Chaos Dwarfs' numbers continued to dwindle, not through battle but through madness. Some awoke screaming, convinced roots had grown into their mouths during the night. Others fired wildly into the darkness, claiming to see glowing eyes that weren't there, until their comrades lay riddled with bullets. Even the war machines suffered. One soulbound engine began weeping blood from its joints. Another turned on its handlers and crushed them to paste, bellowing a single phrase in an unknown dialect before collapsing into rust. Drashkul did not sleep. He could not. The scepter of Tepok pulsed with a life of its own now, its energies whispering secrets of the ley-lines, showing him visions of star charts and beast languages. But with knowledge came nightmares. In dreams he saw scales behind his eyes, golden masks with mouths that dripped venom, and the endless gaze of a cosmic predator whose name was not meant for mortal tongues. Even awake, he began to see things. Skinks walking between seconds. Saurus warriors frozen in place, invisible until they moved. He trusted no one. He executed 5 of his own guards for inconsistencies in gait. As dusk fell on the 10th day since the desecration of the temple, a great cry rose from the southern perimeter. It was not a battle cry. It was a shriek, primal and agonized. When the Chaos Dwarfs arrived, they found what remained of a forward camp. 40 soldiers. Gone. The only trace, a single Chaos Dwarf crucified upside down on a tree. His entrails had been arranged in perfect spirals around his hanging corpse. Beneath him, drawn in blood, the same phrase, "We dream where you bleed." That night the jungle didn't attack. It simply watched, and that was worse. Chapter 6. The Wrath of the Old Ones. The storm broke at midnight. Rain fell not in drops but in torrents, walls of water that pounded the jungle into a quagmire of pulped leaves and liquefied earth. Lightning seared the sky in twisted veins of pale blue, illuminating the temple ruins like a corpse on a slab. Thunder cracked with unnatural cadence, like the drums of ancient gods. It wasn't natural. Nothing about it was. The heavens themselves were howling, and the Lizardmen came with it. They struck first at the outer barricades, 2 concentric rings of iron spikes, manned by hobgoblin thralls and armored Chaos Dwarfs. There was no warning, just a roar, a guttural, bestial war cry, and the sound of something massive charging. The first barricade vanished in an explosion of shattered wood and splintered metal as a stegodon slammed through it, tusks wrapped in bronze, halda bristling with skink archers. Arrows whistled through the air, glistening with venom, embedding in faces and throats. Chaos Dwarfs screamed and gurgled, some choking as their throats dissolved, others clawing at their skin as paralysis took them mid-swing. From behind the beast surged a flood of Saurus warriors, glimmering blue hides slick with rain, eyes afire with sacred fury. They didn't charge with the reckless abandon of barbarians. They advanced in lines, tight formations, ancient tactics drilled into their blood by the old ones themselves. Their obsidian blades bit through dwarf steel with cracking precision. A squad of blunderbusters unleashed a volley into the oncoming horde. Black powder smoke billowed, flesh shredded, limbs flew. And the Saurus kept coming. Drashkul Ironbraid stood atop a command platform of slagstone, lightning dancing across the blackened spire behind him. He raised the scepter of Tepok, the artifact writhing in his grip, and bellowed a command. The infernal engines responded. Massive machines forged of brass, demon iron, and suffering, they lurched forward with grinding wheels and steam-driven limbs. One, the blood-harrower, bellowed as its furnace heart ignited, a demon scream echoing from its vented pipes. Its front-mounted flame maw opened and belched a cone of green fire that engulfed a charging Kroxigr. The beast's skin blackened, cracked, and fell away as it stumbled, blind and burning, before collapsing into a sizzling heap of meat. The machines wrought devastation. Magma cannon fired, its payload splashing into the center of a Saurus phalanx, instantly incinerating 7 warriors and painting the surrounding jungle with molten gore. One skink, caught on the edge, tried to crawl away, but his legs had fused into charred stumps. He shrieked until a hobgoblin stomped his skull flat. But the Lizardmen had brought their own horrors. From the mists surged a Carnosaur, a wall of muscle and scale with eyes like molten gold. Its roar split the heavens as it crashed into the right flank, snapping a Chaos Dwarf in half with its first bite. The rider atop it, a Scar veteran clad in sun-forged armor, wielded a glaive of sharpened meteoric iron. With every sweep he lopped off heads, crushed skulls, and painted the beast's flanks in arterial spray. The iron-bound golem, Drashkul's daemon-crowned guardian, strode to meet the beast. They collided with a force that shattered the earth. Steel limbs met talon and fang. The golem slammed its fist into the Carnosaur's snout, sending teeth flying. The beast responded by ramming its claws through the golem's chest plate and tearing out a fistful of writhing, screaming gears. The demon inside roared in pain, flame gouting from its joints. They fought like titans while men and monsters died in their shadow. All around them, chaos reigned. Skinks darted through the lines, flinging obsidian chakrams that severed tendons and split faces. One hurled a flask of glowing ichor that burst upon a dwarf's helmet. The dwarf screamed as his skin blistered and sloughed off in steaming strips. The chameleon skinks materialized atop the siege towers. One slid a poisoned blade into an engineer's throat and vanished before his body hit the ground. Drashkul's elite fell back toward the temple's inner sanctum, dragging their wounded, rallying around the scepter's terrible light. The artifact blazed now, spewing arcs of lightning into the sky. It hummed with layered voices, some pleading, some laughing, some speaking languages no throat had uttered in 10,000 years. Drashkul threw back his head and howled. With a surge of unholy power, he drove the scepter into the ground. The temple shuddered. Energy rippled out from the point of impact, a dome of pure, violent force that incinerated anything within 50 paces. Saurus turned to bone in a blink. Skinks were flung through the air like dolls. Even the rain seemed to boil mid-fall. The Carnosaur reared back and roared, bleeding from the eyes as it stumbled. But the slam had arrived. Hovering into view like a dread omen, Yehotal Khan entered the battlefield atop his palanquin. His eyes glowed with unblinking ancient fury. Runes of the stars circled his body, and his voice rang out, not through air, but through the soul. This land remembers. You shall not defile it further. With a gesture, the winds themselves shifted. A maelstrom of celestial power descended upon the battlefield. Trees bent and groaned. The ground cracked. A bolt of pure astral energy struck one of the Chaos Dwarf constructs, folding it inward, its metal screaming as it collapsed into a singularity before vanishing with a pop of displaced matter. Drabskul locked eyes with the slan. The air between them thickened with pressure, the magic palpable, oppressive. He raised the scepter. Zotalkan raised a finger, and then the earth split. A fault line erupted between the temple and the jungle. Fire and black mist belched upward. The battle paused just for a moment as both forces realized the fight was no longer just between them. The jungle itself had awakened, and it was not finished. Chapter 7. Sorcery and Sacrifice. The breach in the earth belched filth into the sky. A black mist poured forth from the widening fissure, thick as tar, swirling with flecks of burning ash and something older, something alive. It stank of rot, copper, and something worse, memories that didn't belong to the minds inhaling them. The surviving Chaos Dwarves staggered back, gagging, clutching their heads as phantom voices screamed in alien tongues. Drashkul Ironbraid stood unmoved, his face upturned to the corrupted heavens. Rain streamed down his soot-caked face, hissing as it struck his burning armor. The scepter of Tepok pulsed in his grip, resonating with the wound in the land. The earth, the ley-lines, the stars above. They were connected. And now they knew him. He smiled. Around him, chaos reigned. Bodies floated in pools of blood-tinged mud. Skink corpses twitched, their souls refusing to settle. Demon-bound machines wandered, blind and keening, dripping molten ichor from shattered hulls. A Kroxiger, impaled by 3 steel spears, still gnashed its broken teeth, roaring until a hobgoblin silenced it with a hatchet to the skull. But Drashkul had no time for the dying. His gaze was fixed on the altar platform, the ancient seat of the temple's power, once consecrated to the heavens. Now, it would be repurposed. He turned to his inner circle, what remained of it. 10 Chaos Dwarfs clad in robes of flameback and bone white, eyes glazed with exhaustion and dread. "Bring the sacrifices," he commanded. They obeyed without hesitation. From the slave pens, crude pits of spiked iron and rotting wood, came a fresh offering. Men of the Empire, orcs, ogres, beastmen, even a captured chameleon skink, blind and bound. They were herded up the steps under lashes and firebrands, driven to the altar where the air itself crackled with forbidden magic. Drashkul raised the scepter high and began the chant. The words twisted in the mouth. They dripped with consonants like broken glass and vowels stretched like sinew. The air thickened further. Time staggered. Those closest to the ritual began to bleed from the eyes, their veins blackening as magic too old for mortal bodies seeped into their bones. One by one, the sacrifices were offered. The ogre thrashed, roaring until the executioner's axe struck his neck and bounced. Flesh resisted. It took 3 more blows, each more frantic than the last, before the head came loose. It rolled down the steps, eyes wide, teeth still gnashing, as arterial spray painted the altar in heavy arcs. The Empire soldier begged for mercy in Rakespiel. It availed him nothing. His chest was opened like a fruit. Ribs peeled apart, heart wrenched free and fed to the burning mouth of a demon-forged censer. The heart hissed, sizzled, then burst into spectral flame, screaming as it was consumed. And still the chant rose. Lightning struck the altar, again and again, never harming Thrice-Coiled. His silhouette burned into the eyes of those watching, arms outstretched, scepter raised, surrounded by fire and ruin. Then came the skink. It said nothing, only stared at Thrice-Coiled as it was dragged to the altar. Its wounds were many. One arm was broken, tail severed. Yet its gaze held no fear, only judgment. Thrice-Coiled sneered. "Your gods have failed you." He brought the scepter down. The skink's body exploded in a radiant blast of turquoise light. Everyone near the altar was knocked flat. Blood poured from ears and eyes, and the scepter screamed, a sound like crystal being ground to powder and mixed with hatred. Runes along its shaft flashed, then changed, mutating, writhing into new shapes that had no right to exist. Thrice-Coiled rose, trembling with power. The ley-lines had bowed. He could feel them now, threads beneath the world, golden rivers of essence that pulsed through Lustria like veins through a dragon's heart. He reached out. The jungle shuddered. Roots twisted underfoot. Trees bent away from him. Even the sky seemed to flinch. He turned to his warriors, eyes blazing. "We have done what the Slan feared. Their gods were architects. We are destroyers. Their stars fall, our flames rise." A roar echoed from the jungle. It wasn't the call of a beast. It was judgment. The sky split, and light poured from it, not sun, not moon, but something deeper. Starlight infused with wrath. And into the clearing stepped the next wave. Temple guard, their golden masks reflecting the sacred fury of their slan, advanced in silence. Each step matched the heartbeat of the world. Behind them floated the Oto Khan, borne aloft by his palanquin of enchanted jade and obsidian, his eyes closed, hands folded. But his mind was a storm. Without moving, he unleashed it. A beam of raw cosmic force surged from the heavens and obliterated a siege tower in a single instant. Metal vaporized. Screams ceased before they could finish. Ash rained from the sky like snow. Thrice-Coiled stepped down from the altar, the scepter humming. The earth around him cracked. Lava bubbled from between the stones. A great rune burned beneath his feet, and as it flared, he pointed the scepter at the advancing guard. "Come then," he said, voice layered with demonic echoes. "Let your gods see you fall." And the two forces crashed together once more, divine purpose against forged heresy, stars clashing with fire, while the jungle watched and wept blood. Chapter 8. Siege of the Sunken Temple. The storm had not passed, it had simply evolved. Now it was a thing of will, not weather. Winds twisted in impossible directions, dragging cries across the jungle like funeral chants. The temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars, once lost in the tangle of green and forgotten time, now stood reborn in ruin, illuminated by the fires of industry and the blood of conquest. Yet it was not a fortress. It was a beacon, pulsing with the unnatural resonance of a defiled ley line, and now every creature in Lustria, every predator, every ghost, every god-born thing was converging on it. Thrice-Coiled had turned the inner sanctum of the temple into a citadel of sorcery and steel. Its steps were layered with iron plating. Ballistae mounted on stone towers had been refitted to fire demon glass bolts. Magma channels flowed like arteries, redirected from furnaces deep below, their glow pulsing red through the cracks of the stone, as though the temple itself now lived and bled. His warriors were fewer now, but each was a zealot. Their armor was fused to their flesh, seared into their very bones. Hobgoblins, webbed and wired with pain nets, manned the walls under threat of instant incineration. The air reeked of ozone, blood, and demonic musk. And in the inner chamber, Thrice-Coiled prepared. He had opened the ley line beneath the temple with the scepter's power, binding it into a crucible of churning magical flux. Runes danced in the air, spirits hissed in agony, chained to pylons of brass and obsidian, their essence feeding the ritual that now consumed his mind and body. His left eye had fused shut, blackened and weeping fire. His veins glowed visibly, shifting under his skin like serpents. The scepter of Tapok was no longer an artifact in his grasp. It was alive, and it had chosen him. At dawn, the jungle howled, and then attacked. The Lizardmen came not as an army, but as a natural disaster. Every tree line vomited warriors. Ancient stegodons, their flanks covered in scars and ritual armor, plowed through spike walls. Skinks on pterodon back dove from the skies, releasing bone-tipped javelins and skyfire bombs that erupted with bursts of sun energy, screaming slaves where they stood. From the western slope, a wave of temple guard advanced, silent, orderly, their obsidian halberds flashing with sacred light. Their eyes glowed not with rage, but with purpose, as if every strike they made was not war but ritual. They were not just retaking a temple. They were exorcising a sickness. A blast from a death shriek cannon tore through a rank of advancing skinks, pulping bodies in a shockwave of metal and noise. Blood sprayed the walls. Another bolt impaled a Croxagore through the spine and pinned it to a dying tree, where it roared until its ribcage collapsed under the weight of its own organs. The war machines earned their keep, but the jungle did not stop. It grew angrier. From the fissure at the base of the temple, roots, thick as ogres and black with mold, rose and coiled over barricades, tearing down iron, hurling dwarfs screaming into the abyss. The ley line pulsed again, and the corrupted energies Thrice-Coiled had drawn began to fracture the temple itself, stones rising into the air, defying gravity, glowing with unstable power. A roar silenced even the storm. From the trees emerged a bastiladon, its shell pulsing with light from the solar engine mounted on its back. Skinks rode in its armored nest, chanting and aiming the device, which hummed before firing a searing lance of solar energy straight into a defensive tower. The explosion was apocalyptic. The tower didn't fall. It vaporized. Dwarfs and hobgoblins alike vanished in a flash of white-gold brilliance, their screams turned to echoes trapped in glass. When the light dimmed, only a smoldering crater remained. The defenders wavered. Thrice-Coiled appeared on the outer battlements, the scepter raised. His voice echoed unnaturally as though 1,000 mouths repeated his every word. "You think to reclaim this place? It is no longer yours. The stars are broken. The gods are bleeding. I have taken your sanctum, your bloodlines, your very sun." He raised the scepter high. A wave of arcing fire, twisted with warp energy and geomantic backlash, surged outward in a nova of pain. It disintegrated everything in its radius, jungle, lizardmen, and stone alike. Temple guard were flung like dolls, their armor fusing with their skin, their bones snapping as reality folded in upon itself. Trees screamed as they caught fire, some turning to crystal, others melting into puddles of vibrant slime. But Thrice-Coiled had gone too far. The ley line beneath the temple screamed, a sound that rippled through the soul. The energy he had bound began to fracture, threads of raw magic flailing like snapped tendons. The sky above cracked with lightning, but it was not lightning of the storm. It was celestial judgment, called down by a mind older than continents. Floating above the battlefield, Shotokan's eyes opened wide. Hold the stars aligned. The jungle went still. The light of the constellation of Tepok, the serpent of wisdom, bathed the temple. Every lizardman paused, lifting their weapons high, not in praise, but in sentence. The Slan's voice boomed. "You have desecrated the coil of the cosmos. Now it coils around you." A column of pure energy descended from the sky, striking the apex of the temple. It did not destroy. It peeled. The top layers of the temple began to unravel, stone and steel flaking away into dust, revealing the ancient sigils beneath. Those sigils blazed with white flame, and the temple began to sink, stone crumbling and reforming, the structure dragging itself back into the earth, as if it had decided to devour the defilers from within. Thrice-Coiled, clutching the scepter, howled in defiance. But for the first time, he sounded afraid. Chapter 9. The Great Convergence. The temple screamed as it died. Its stones shrieked, its foundations convulsed, and its corridors, once sanctified by starlight and sacrifice, now wept molten blood. A grinding groan echoed through the jungle as the temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars began to collapse in upon itself. Not in destruction, but in ritualized rebirth, as though the land itself was digesting the corruption forced into it. Thrice-Coiled Ironbraid stood atop the central dais, surrounded by a swirling vortex of broken ley energy and demonic fire. His flesh was warped beyond recognition, his armor fused to his body like an exoskeleton of brass and obsidian, his jaw unhinged to accommodate the torrents of language no mortal throat should utter. Where once stood a Chaos Dwarf, now something else stood. Half thing, half god, a symbiotic wretch of sorcerous ambition and the scepter's alien will. The scepter of Tepok no longer obeyed. It pulsed in his grip, resisting, twisting, lashing out with tendrils of magic that arced like vipers. Every time Thrice-Coiled tried to direct its power, it fed him flashes of memory, not his own, visions of the stars being birthed, the world in its cradle, and great-scaled beings standing on celestial platforms, casting entire continents like game pieces across a cosmic board. The minds of the old ones. Too vast, too deep, too alien. His eyes bled starlight. "Obey me," he snarled, slamming the scepter into the fractured stone beneath his feet. "I am your wielder." The temple didn't answer, but the ley-lines did. A great tremor surged through the world as if the planet's bones had cracked. A geyser of magical energy burst upward, engulfing Thrice-Coiled in a spiraling column of blue-white light that pierced the clouds and joined the stars above. The Great Convergence had begun. Across Lustria, the stars shifted. Geomantic nodes flared. Forgotten wards, slumbering since before the coming of chaos, activated. Old ones' glyphs etched into monolithic ruins burned with sudden intensity. The jungle shivered, not in fear, but in alignment. The Slan Zotalkan rose higher on his floating palanquin, his form now surrounded by rotating discs of celestial energy. His voice, terrible and patient, thundered across the battlefield. The threads are cut, the thief is revealed, the stars claim what was taken. Thrice-Coiled, within the conflagration of divine and arcane, felt his skin unraveling. Muscles tightened and snapped like wires under strain. His left arm ballooned with raw magic and then burst open, bone forming new, writhing appendages in its place. His mind fractured. He saw the temple not as it was, but as it used to be, pristine, golden, alive with chanting skinks and glowing relics. Then he saw the future, a world burned, consumed by demonic fire, ruled by a crowned silhouette bearing his warped face. But the stars denied him. With a sound like a bell tolling from beyond the veil of death, a final pulse surged through the scepter. The weapon exploded, not in flames or shards, but in light, pure, geometric, perfect light that cut reality along its seams. Droshkul's body hovered for a moment, arms outstretched, mouth agape as that light peeled him apart. His bones blackened and fell inward, his armor liquefied and spiraled upward like iron dust caught in a magnetic storm. His soul, clinging to his shattered ambition, howled once, twice, and was shattered. What remained of him fell to the floor, a statue of obsidian, mouth open in eternal defiance, eyes blank. A moment later, the weight of the ley-lines' restored order crushed the husk into fine dust. The temple heaved. With its desecrator destroyed, it began to collapse fully. Stones cracked and folded inward. Statues wept molten gold. Glyphs burned out in cascades of flame. But it was not wrath, it was cleansing. The Surus warriors, their mission complete, withdrew silently, carrying their dead and chanting softly as their formation melted back into the jungle. Slem Jotal Khan closed his eyes and vanished in a flare of pale light. The remaining Chaos Dwarfs, leaderless, mad and broken, ran. Some plunged into the jungle, where nothing waited but hunger. Some begged the gods for mercy, only to be silenced by arrows from the shadows. One, a blood-slicked demon-smith, tried to flee with a scrap of the scepter still warm in his hands. A chameleon skink was waiting for him. The blade slid beneath the ribs, up into the lungs, and as the dwarf gurgled, the skink whispered something in the language of the stars. Then silence, and the temple, the jungle, the storm, all returned to stillness. Only dust remained of the would-be god. Chapter 10. Vengeance Complete. The jungle breathed again. With the desecration undone and the ley-lines soothed, Lustria began to reclaim what had been briefly taken. The rain slowed to a gentle mist, washing blood from the cracked stones of the temple like a mother cleansing her wounded child. Steam rose from the ground, mingling with the smoke of smoldering war machines and the scent of scorched flesh. What was once a battlefield had become a graveyard, a sanctified tomb not for the honored, but for the warned. The last vestiges of the Chaos Dwarf presence were nothing more than twitching remnants. Hobgoblins who'd survived the siege had turned feral, scurrying into the jungle like rats fleeing a sinking forge. Some were caught in vine snares, screaming as thorn creepers dragged them underground. Others were found impaled on trees, their bodies split open like meat hung for curing, offered to the unseen predators that feasted only after defilement had been punished. The few Chaos Dwarfs who hadn't died in battle met slower ends. One engineer, half mad and slathered in soot, tried to pray to hush it by igniting a pyre of broken statues and corpses. Before the flame caught, a spear struck him through the mouth and pinned him to the stone like a grotesque trophy. His limbs continued to twitch long after the fire consumed his robes. Another was found crawling toward the river, hands worn to bone. A shadow dropped from the trees, a chameleon skink with a blade of star metal and with one clean cut, separated head from shoulders. The skink whispered a benediction to the stars and vanished, leaving the corpse to the worms. By the next morning, none of the invaders remained. The temple of the Thrice-Coiled Stars did not rise from its partial collapse. It simply ceased to be visible. Vines overtook what was left of the structure, stones smoothed as if 1,000 years passed in a single day. The jungle reabsorbed it with the quiet finality of a wound scabbing over. Trees grew unnaturally fast. Roots split stone. Moss bloomed thick as carpets. And then the animals returned. Bright feathered birds wheeled through the air. Lizards skittered along the new growth. Even the insects resumed their buzz, the hum now a softer, harmonious drone, as if the land sang to itself again, no longer weeping. Far above, in the sacred precinct of Jean Huapec, Slan Mage-Priest, Jotal Khan drifted within a chamber wreathed in light. The energies of the convergence still pulsed beneath his throne, cycling through astral diagrams drawn in the void. He was still, not asleep, not awake, remembering. Below him, the temple guards stood motionless, halberds grounded, heads bowed. Skink scribes recorded the event in golden ink on tablets of jade. The glyph for vengeance was repeated 3 times. Back at the battlefield, only one sign remained, a statue of obsidian dust, scattered like black sand across the final altar, all that was left of Drazkul Ironbraid. The scepter of Tepok had vanished, not taken, not hidden, returned, as if it had never been touched by unworthy hands. The ley-lines, once corrupted, now thrummed with clarity. Magic flowed again, not as a torrent, but a song. And deep beneath the roots of the jungle, the bones of ancient gods shifted ever so slightly in their tombs, satisfied. Lustria had bled, but it had bled on its own terms. The invaders had come for glory, for power, for dominion. They found none. Only the vengeance of the old ones, swift, silent, and final,